Welcome to the Backyard Professor Chess videos. I am excited to show you what I found. We amateurs in chess, we need the rock solid foundational principles to improve our chess. This video I'm about to show you could change your chess for the better for the rest of your life. So let's get on with it. Fred Reinfeldt, The Complete Chess Course. Profound information. It's one thing to know how to fight back. It's another thing to be able to do it yourself in your own games. We're going to look at a faulty defense that black plays in this example. I absolutely love chess instruction like this. White opens with pawn king 4. Now this is a great opening move. It opens up the diagonal for the king bishop. It gives the king's knight an extra square if the f3 doesn't work out, although the natural square for the knight is f3, depending on what the opening is. It establishes a presence in the center on e4, and it hits d5 and f5. You will never be wrong opening with the king-pawn opening like this. Black responds pawn king 3. A little bit less timid, but it looks like he's trying to go for a French defense. White comes up with the pawn queen 4. Again, an outstanding chess opening. The queen pawn push opens up the queen bishop file for the queen. It also gives the queen knight an extra square to go to if c3 doesn't work out for him, depending on what happens in the opening. It establishes a strong pawn presence in the center. It also hits e5 and c5, powerful central squares. You cannot go wrong opening like this. You will never find a grandmaster or a master on the planet who will ever criticize you for opening like this. So, let's proceed. Black now opens pawn king knight 3. Let's let Reinfeldt give us an idea here. With the game barely started, black has committed a mistake which should lose the game for him. And you go, come on, Reinfeldt. It's obvious that black is going to fianchetto his bishop, and that's going to give him a very long, powerful slice right through the middle of that board, right through the center of the board where his presence needs to be felt. How on earth can that be a wrong move? Well, the fact is, it's not a wrong move. It's a wrong timed move. The real issue is, what is black's best second move from this position? It wasn't that. It was pawn queen 4. The reason, as Reinfeldt explains it, is because, number one, this fights for control of the center. This also opens up the king bishop along this file. It gives the queen breathing space, and it gives a potential for the queen bishop to come out as well. If you don't establish or fight for control of the center, you don't have as good of a mobility. I mean, that sounds logical, right? Sure, that was what black should have done. Instead, he did this. And we shall see that the timing of black ignoring the center completely destroys him. And the odd thing is, it's only the second move. Are you serious? Yes. Let's proceed and I'll show you. Bishop Queen 3. Again, because he's opened very powerfully, he has the ability and the mobility to begin coordinating his minor pieces. Bishop Knight 2. See, there you go. Now black has established a fabulous diagonal across the center of the board. You can't criticize that. Watch. This is a lesson in fabulous chess. Bishop King Knight 3. Again, a rock solid center. Now Knight goes to King 2. Again, timid, passive play. It doesn't hit the center. It hits D5 and F5, yes, but it doesn't hit the center as hitting E4 and D5 would. It's a weaker spot for the knight in this particular opening. Now, interestingly, I criticized black for doing that. White does it also. But there's a different reason for white than for black. Again, he pushes pawn knight 3. The knight comes down to queen 2, again giving his center absolute solid rock support. This is an astonishing center for white. Now the game is proceeding so far. Black's position now is very cramped. And here is the problem with his opening. He's playing passively. He's a little timid. He's not hitting the center. So white has made an absolute perfect fortress of the center, and he's not developing strongly. It's passive play, and it gets him in trouble. He has absolutely no positive plan whatsoever available to him right now, and he has nothing to look forward to except purely defensive play. And that's not a real heartening way to open. If you play for defense only without any punch, you know, you get in the boxing ring and if all you do is cover up and let your opponent punch you all through the match, you won't win. That's a fact. Passive play is black's problem. Watch what white does. White goes ahead and castles. A very good move, getting ready to connect his rooks. Finally, black comes up to pawn queen 4. And you're probably asking, all right, so what was all that big lecture and whoop-de-doo and hot air blowing steam about? Because now he is fighting for control of the center. The problem now is it's too late. He should have done that a couple of moves ago. Why? This is the one thing I love putting into my videos of chess, is the explanation of what and why. Because now white does this. And now all of a sudden you see very serious problems for black. For one thing, this bishop has been rendered completely useless. For another thing, his control of F6 and D6 cramp his pieces, cramps his ability to get his queen into this game, and it cramps his pawns so that his pieces begin to stumble all over themselves and get in each other's way. Just that one little pawn move absolutely defeats black. And you go, oh, come on, dude, aren't you exaggerating? Let's watch. Let's keep watching. So he does castle. He says, well, all right, I've got a castle. He's got a great protection. Granted, he's pushed the g-pawn, and understand this, pushing the g-pawn is not an error. I've got to adjust my light, sorry. Pushing the g-pawn is not an error in the opening. Just recognize that when you do push this g-pawn, you create weak squares on h6 and f6. Now, the bishop, being fianchettos, covers those, so this bishop is a very strong guardian for now. Just so you recognize that. So he castles. Now, white has really limited black here. What do you think the next correct thing for white to do is? So when we look at the board, what do we see? The imbalance. The imbalance. Well, there's two imbalances, actually. One is development. White has the superior development. He's obviously far more mobile with his pieces, with his knights, his bishops, than black is, right? He's got all four of his minor pieces fabulously developed. He also has better central space. You can see that, right? This pawn establishes more space in the center. More space means more mobility, and more mobility gives us the opportunity to coordinate our pieces together better. All of this, black has none. And this loses the game for him. So what's white's next move? You have space in the center. You have great development. It's locked. So stuff him back in the corner. This is a very powerful pawn move. Now black follows suit. Pawn, king, bishop, 4. And let's read what Reinfeldt says. Now, the right strategy for black, that pawn thrust. And why is this the right strategy for black at this point? Because his mobility is so limited at this point that he wants to barricade the position. And when white tries to attack, he may not be able to get through those barriers that black is setting up. But this is a plausible defensive notion. Unfortunately, the history of chess is against black's strategy. White, because he has more space, white, because he has better mobility, can coordinate better, and inevitably usually does break through black's barrier. Even though that's a pretty strong barrier, white will be able to break through. That's the problem. Pawn, king, rook 3. Knight comes to queen 2 because the nature of the board is such that he is completely playing timid at this point. He is thinking pure defense. His passive play has got him into this pickle. And we'll see how vastly bad it is as the game moves on. King, rook 2. Pawn, bishop 4. Pawn, bishop 3. Pawn, bishop 5. Bishop, queen, bishop 2. And pawn, queen, rook 3. Now what do we see? A totally closed position, right? Now there's nothing wrong with this as such. However, Black is willy-nilly dallying back and forth. He's trying to threaten to show that he's going to make a queenside attack. And he needs to by continuing pushing those pawns to attack and break up his queenside, because his forces are on the queenside. He needs to absolutely go full throttle on the queenside. That's the only option he's got. And yet he doesn't do it. And so that costs him. He's trying to distract White's attention away from the problems over here on the king's side. The king's side is absolutely riddled with weak squares absolutely everywhere. That king is not safe. Look, the knight can't even move. This knight can barely move, but he has no safe squares to come to protect the king. The bishop is absolutely stuck in a corner. Black is in trouble because he is so cramped because of that second move in his game. This is fascinating. So let's keep looking. Knight comes to here, and here we go. The movement to the king's side. Now, this just simply weakens the king's side more. Anytime you move a kingside pawn, you weaken the king's side. You need to recognize that. If you can at all help it, do not move those pawns. And this really pays, because now Black can come full throttle at him and attack. Brings his rook up. Notice, King Rook Knight 1. He's going to open this file and he's going to come after the king. So he's got to do defense. King Rook Knight 1. Queen comes up to Queen 1, King 1, because not only are you going to have a rook on a file eventually, you're going to have access to the H file with your queen. You're going to have access to G5 with your knight. You're going to have access with your bishop. You're going to have access with your other bishop. It is a full kingside attack coming up. And how he does this is utterly exquisite. Then he says the knight comes to Queen Bishop 3, and he's got a question mark. He says, what in the hell is Black doing? Well, he doesn't say that, but that was my first initial response. Look, where is the major weakness on the Black king side? You can see it just as clear as the nose on your face, can't you? That pawn. The knight pawn is the weakest part on the king side right now. The bishop, the knight that was here, was giving support to that pawn, and now he moves it over to here, trying to do a head fake, trying to intimidate White into thinking, here I come, I'm coming after your queen's side. That is not how to do it. That knight belonged there now above all else, because there's the target. Beep, 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 beep. When you see a weakness on your opponent's kingside castled position, that is your target. And he took a piece away from it? That's not good. So, Knight Rook 4, what's he do? First thing he does, hit the target. Knight Rook 4. Queen comes up to King Bishop 1. Again, another error. And you say, well, now hold on, Shirts. The queen does support the bishop. The queen does come up here and support this pawn in case he takes the pawn, right? No. The correct move now is to put the knight there. Do you see why? Because it supports the weakest point on the king's side. But he didn't put it there. He moved his queen here, which does nothing to support the weak point in the position. Right? That is not good. That's the wrong move. Knight now takes the knight pawn. Now it's time to start sacrificing. You sacrifice pieces on a kingside attack to open up the king side. And man, does white open up the king side. The king has to take the knight. Pawn takes pawn, double check. That's fabulous. Now you're about to see one of the prettiest kingside attacks I've ever seen. This is just pure power because white is playing aggressively, smartly. He has more room in the center, and therefore he has more mobility and chance to coordinate his pieces together in an attack. It's beautiful chess we're about to witness here. This is fantastic. King has to come into bishop 2. He can't come back to here because the pawn is going to take that pawn, and now look at whose bishop is more powerful. That bishop gives the king a discovered check. Compare his bishop with his bishop that hasn't even got into the game yet. Compare white's bishop's power to black's bishop's power, which is virtually nil. And you see the difference in the positions. So what this has done, white's attack on the king has virtually forced the king... Whoop. How did that go? Yeah, he was here. White's attack has virtually forced the king into the open, and he goes back to king bishop 2. Now watch. What do you see white doing? I mean for real. This is so fabulous, it's incredible. Pawn takes pawn, check. Again, the king takes the pawn. Now what do you see white doing? He has opened up the lane for his bishop. He has opened up the lane for his rook. He's going to have his other rook coming in here pretty quick because his queen is now open to come up to queen 4, to h4. He pushes the pawn, check. So the king comes back, and now the queen comes into the game. Queen, rook 4, check. The king has to drop down to king, king 1. You notice the king is being driven around brutally while white has opened up all of his lanes and he has all of his pieces into a beautiful coordinated kingside attack. And because black is so cramped, you notice that over half his army can't even help. There's our lesson. There is our lesson. Pawn, bishop, 6. Black can't put his bishop back here. He can't. He's virtually forced to take the pawn. And he does so. And the pawn takes the bishop. Look at that beautiful passed pawn staring down at the queen in utter defiance. Well, the rook takes the rook, and his rook takes the rook, and now look at this position. It's an absolute massacre as far as that goes. Knight takes the bishop pawn. Look how wide open black is. Bishop comes into knight 6, check. King comes over to queen 2. Bishop drops down to bishop 5, check. King goes back to king 1. And now the bishop takes the pawn, threatening the queen. The queen has nowhere to go but here to rook 1. which is absolutely worthless to protect the king because every single possible angle and conceivable way of avenue is wide open for white. His coordination is based directly on him having this powerful center and extra center space. Have you noticed that? The passive play of black from the second move on cost him this game. That's the lesson. Now the bishop takes the pawn, queen goes to rook 1, rook comes up to knight 7, knight goes to king knight 1, putting it to the bishop. And now it was here that white announced mate in 3. So black resigned. And the mate is this. Bishop knight 6 check. King has only one square to go to, the bishop square. Queen comes up over to bishop 4, check. Knight comes up to b3. Queen takes the knight, checkmate. Notice the final position of this incredibly instructive game. One solid block of pure power. 4 pieces against the king. While black's army has been virtually helpless. He didn't even have the space, he didn't even have the ability to get his army out here to protect the king, and white took complete advantage of that. The lesson in this chessercise is while we're playing black, don't ever play passively and let white establish a strong center. We now visually have seen the consequence. We've seen the connection, as it were, between a strong center and extra central space and the ability to stay movable. You can move your pieces wherever you want, back and forth, up and down, side to side, to coordinate them together to attack a king. The king had a strong barrier of pawns, and white's pawns literally ate the barrier away so that the pieces could win this game. I mean, that's a lesson, man. So, there you have it. Happy chessercising, happy checkmating, and I will see you in the next video.